Hello everyone, this is Carlos Dominguez. I would like to show you label impulse, and I hope you enjoy it and see what this tool can do for your shop. So let's start. Label impulse is a web application, a cloud-based application, so you don't need to install nothing on your computer. So you just need to sign in or to register. You can with a 30-day, no questions asked trial. So try it. And so we need to just sign in directly into the tool, and it jumps directly to the projects area. You see here three projects already, and we just need to press new project, and it jumps directly to the upload area. You can do it directly here uploading, or you can simply drag and drop any file from your desktop, and it could be Windows or Macintosh. It uploads the file to our server, and what's going on here is that the tool is already imposing the label, guessing which is the right rotation and which is the right size. So our process, our software is planned as a 5-step process. So we start uploading the file that we just did, and the tool starts giving us some information. So in this case, it says that the label is 112 millimeters by 120 millimeters, and it does have a die line. This is very important. We encourage that every single PDF fed into our system should have a die line, because actually the die dictates everything regarding how we manipulate the imposing of the label. We will go back to this in a few moments. Then we have the second step, which we call pre-flight, which is basically a set of rules and a set of tests that the system runs in order to understand potential problems with the file going forward. And what it is, the one of the best things that we can do with the pre-fly is to work in this visual area, which we call the canvas, and we can actually switch the color channels to see the separation here on the screen, in order to understand if the file would print correctly or not. Part of the intelligence, if we can say so, about our system is that it finds the spot colors dedicated to die line and to some other things. In this case, it finds a spot color called suaje, which is a Mexican word for die line. And it automatically make the role of this spot color as the die line. We can decide if it is not the die line, we can define that it will print. And in case we decide if it will print, it changes everything. It changes the geometry of the imposition, because now the system doesn't know where to start calculating the bleed area. So everything in our process is related to the die line, as actually as the label production does. So we get back to this is the die line, and everything changes. We're gonna zoom in later on. But one of the main objectives or pre-flight, as mentioned before, is to define or to find potential problems down the road. In this case, it says it has two different kind of messages. The pre-flight produces two different messages. One is called urgent, and the other one is only information. We're going to focus on the urgent messages that we have here, 3. The first one is related to rich black in 2 artwork fields. So if we don't understand what it says, we can go simply and zoom in on a label and press locate. And it happens that this hard shape and what probably the name of the product is, it's marked as a rich black, very thin area, so it can produce some misregister or some problems with the registration. We can use the pre-flight area to turn on and turn off the different channels and the different separations in order to understand if that's a real problem or not. In my case, I believe it is not, because it is also blended, or it is kind of blended with the image below. So I believe it's not a real problem, but it's good that the software tells us, hey, look at this and decide if it's a problem or not. We have a second message that it says that we have 21 small or thin elements also in rich black. And we see here it's also a part of the logo. So I believe it is not a problem, so we can hide that highlight. We have a third message here that it says that we have a problem with a barcode that could be rasterized or it's print in CMYK instead of a flat black, and I believe this is a real threat, because we can get with this barcode, we don't know the resolution of the raster. It looks good here, but probably not enough for barcode. And what we can find here is that it is not only black printed, which is the norm to print barcodes. So it can misregister, and also it can produce misreadings, which is a terrible thing for the product at the store. So this is a real potential problem. And what happens here is that we need to tell the designer and to tell the pre-press department to draw it again. So that would be my recommendation. But keep looking at the file or our process. The step 2 was pre-flight, and then we go to the layout area, which is basically our imposing tool. So what we have here is 2 settings. The first is which press I'm preparing files to. And we can define as much presses that the shop has, because in the preference area you set up a press with important things for preparing the files, as the width of the maximum width it can print, and the maximum and the maximum repetition it can reproduce. In this case, we have the Flora J350, which is a 350 millimeters wide digital press, and then we can choose a die cutter as well. We have this default golden laser, which is a laser cutter. We have a semi-rotary with a 150 teeth maximum repeat length area, and also we have a plotter or a cutting die cutter knives device. So depending on which device we choose, it will tell us which are our maximum values. If we can see here, we have a cross web. We have up to 334 millimeters wide, or in this case is the head of the label, and a long web we have maximum 476 millimeters. That's the case of a 150 teeth repeat length. So what happens if I try to go further on in this case of lanes, which are across web? So I can definitely put, but it becomes dimmed, because you cannot fit more than 2 lanes in the area defined by the press. And if we want to go more rows, it allows us, because it is in the possible area of printing of this press and this semi-rotary die cutter. We can switch to laser, which allow us 900 millimeters, so we can go definitely with a longer repetition length. This is how it works. So it has some intelligence taking into consideration the press and also the die cutter to avoid any problems on the imposition. What happens if we use a Flora 420? We can definitely place another lane, so it fits three lanes. Then the fourth step is what we call the fine tuning, because in the fine tuning, what we can do here is to change the gap between labels and to define the bleed that we need, and also to decide if this should have an eye mark for the die cutter or not. Normally in detail printing it requires a die mark, so we can define if we need it on the press side, on the press operative side, which is what we call here is the right side, which is down, or we can put it on the back of the press, or we can do it both. In this case we have both. This mark also has all the characteristics of what it works for that particular press and particular die cutter, and it can be defined on the preference area as well. So basically what we have now is an imposition of 3 by 4 labels, and after doing so we can jump directly into the export area. What we're gonna do here is to export what we're gonna print, and it says that the color, the spot color called Swage is the die line. So if there would be more spot colors, it would say what we define, what kind of role we define for each color, and also ask us if we want to export the die line as PDF, and we're gonna do it in order for you to see what happens after exporting. So it's gonna calculate, and it's gonna do the exporting, and that what we have is we can see it here. We have the original file, and then we have this that the label impose adds this other part of the name, which is impose matrix 3 by 4, which is exactly the imposition that we found out works for our system, and we can simply double click on that, and we see the file ready to be printed and already imposed, and with all the settings that we define. So this file is ready to go directly to the RIP and to start printing. Also, we exported the die line. In this case, it's a PDF. We recommend as well to do it because you can actually print on your digital press some meters of only the die line to adjust your die cutter instead of wasting ink. So it is a recommendation we have followed for a long time. And also we can export the DX file. A DX file is what the laser cutter and the plotter cutter uses to actually cut. Some of them can import PDF, but at the end it converts a PDF to a DX file. You don't need to do that. You can make sure that our file goes directly to your die cutter, and you can see what it has exported is. It is not a PDF, so we cannot see, but this is a file ready to be imported directly into your die cutter. Well, basically that's our tool. It's very easy, and what it does is to reduce the time and to reduce the stress and the friction regarding preparing the imposition for your labor press. I hope you enjoy it, use it, and give us any feedback. Thank you very much for your attention. See you. Bye.